In our previous video, we talked in depth about strategies and advancement in weaponry that allowed Alexander to conquer half of the world, and talked a bit about his controversial character. Today, we're upping the excitement to 11, with thrilling stories about Alexander's genius and bloody conquest in Persia. The first famous battle of Alexander was the Battle of Granicus in 334 BC, and he immediately showed his tactical genius. This particular campaign started with Alexander quote-unquote liberating Greek cities from Persian rule. In reality, Greeks were mostly fine and didn't need to be liberated. But as with 90% of wars, this was only an excuse. So, Alexander continued his kind of conquest by conquering cities that didn't really resist. What did the Persians do about it? A Greek man called Memnon of Rhodes told Persian governors that Macedon was a small and unimportant force in Greek economics, and they would win by burning their crops and cutting off their access back to the mainland by ships. Bleed them dry until they can't fight. Persian governors thought about it and said, "Nah bro, f*** it, we ball," and decided to attack Macedonians head on. If you watched our previous video, you already know that Alexander also already knew that the army was coming thanks to his vast spy network. Armies met by the Granicus River on different sides. Persians took a defensive position, requiring Macedonians to climb a steep, muddy slope and then the river itself, breaking Phalanx's formation and completely messing up the famous cavalry, while Macedonians had a slight advantage in numbers. The river itself was a big advantage to Persians. How did Alexander overcome this? Well, he said, "F*** it, we ball," and charged across the river. Okay, it was a bit more complicated. He sent foot soldiers across the river in the middle and both cavalry units from left and right flanks. And Alexander himself was leading a charge on one of the units. While the foot soldiers were peppered with arrows, Alexander and his cavalry unit changed their course and rode across the river right into the bulk of Persian forces and began a bloody skirmish where Alexander broke his spear and still managed to fight with it, almost destroyed his shield and armor, and was hit in the back of his head, forcing his bodyguards to surround him and protect against the Persian cavalry, who kept surrounding them from all sides. This not only showed how hot-headed and absolutely barbaric Alexander was, but also his ability to make fast, albeit risky, tactical decisions. This maneuver allowed foot soldiers to arrive safely. Although absolutely exhausted, Macedonians won with barely any losses, proving that Alexander was a force to reckon with. In 333 BC, during the same Persian campaign, happened a Battle of Issus. This time, the Persian king Darius III himself decided to stop Alexander's campaign. As soon as Alexander found out about his approach, he divided his forces into two, second half led by his right-hand man Parmenon, whose task was to take control of lands around the city Issus, which would cut off any naval support for Darius. Alexander himself took Issus. Then he found out about a large army led by Darius not that far from Parmenon, and he rushed to him. Darius didn't go straight to them and instead took Issus back for himself, killing all wounded Macedonian soldiers stationed there. To add to the already bad news, this made Alexander's position worse, as he expected Persian soldiers from the east, not north. Eventually, they met by a river. Again, this time the sea itself was close. It was raining, making everything slippery and giving Persians an upper hand. And that's not all. Persian forces were double in size to the Macedonian army. Macedonians deployed as usual, phalanxes in the middle, Parmenon's cavalry on the left flank, and Alexander's cavalry on the right. Persian forces were truly fierce. Greek mercenaries, cavalry, and Persian immortals. Soon, Parmenon's unit was slowly squashed by famous Persian cavalry and phalanxes peppered by arrows while they tried to cross the river. Alexander charged himself as usual, quickly and effectively attacking Persians on his side of the battlefield, making them slowly retreat up the hill until they fully escaped. And then, from a higher ground, he could observe the battlefield. Parmenon's cavalry was almost destroyed, and phalanxes, now on the other side, were slowly losing their battle. The only thing moving them forward was their bravery. And then, Alexander used one of the most famous Macedonian maneuvers, hammer and anvil. He charged at the Persians and began to attack them from behind, hacking, poking, and slashing closer and closer to Darius himself. This gave the upper hand to phalanxes, and two units together began to make a delicious gore burger. Scared, Darius fled with his armies, including the cavalry who were winning decisively, granting Alexander a hard-fought victory, and an opportunity to play tag with fleeing enemies, only they would die once he would reach them. In the end, Persians lost 20,000 men, and Macedonians 7, which was still a big loss for their smaller forces. Now, we move on to the most crazy and stupidly impressive battle of Persian conquest, Siege of Tyre in 332 BC. We already mentioned it in one of our previous videos, but now it's time to delve deep into it. So what's the deal with the Siege of Tyre? Well, New Tyre is a city on an island surrounded by walls, almost laughably impossible to conquer in any way, except when the one trying to conquer it is an angry, violent gremlin man with an army. Maybe the New Tyre would be spared if they wouldn't outright kill emissaries sent by Alexander, so he got angry and sacked the old Tyre that was built on land. Then they collected building materials from the destroyed city and began to build a road. You see, New Tyre had a submerged land bridge under it. It was 2 meters deep, but allowed to put as much rubble on it as possible, slowly and surely building an actual road to the island of New Tyre and turning the island into a peninsula. The further they built, the harder it got. Tyrians pelted Macedonians with arrows, to which the attacked responded by building siege towers covered with rawhide, and putting catapults on them and attacking archers back. It gets more ridiculous. As a countermeasure, Tyrians filled a ship with combustibles, towed it to the siege towers, lit it up, and released it. Siege towers began to burn, and the Tyrian navy attacked workers who tried to douse the fire. Pretty smart, eh? Alexander responded not only with widening the road, but gathering all ships he could muster, from his conquered city, Macedonia itself, and even from a king of Cyprus who gave Alexander the ships when he heard how cool the boy was. With it, they surrounded Tyre and blocked their fleet. The siege continued, Macedonians even putting battering rams on their ships. Sometimes, Tyrians retaliated and destroyed some ships, but Alexander always retaliated. Finally, after months, ships' battering rams finally managed to make a small hole in the southern wall. This was all Alexander needed, proceeding to pepper the city with arrows and artillery while he led the charge into the city, hacking and slashing their way in. Alexander conquered the city and then killed, crucified, and sold to slavery most of the Tyre's population. This is all for today, but not for Alexander's life and achievement. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you want to see more videos about his battles and personal life.